The hum was the first thing Dr. Eris Thorne had learned to trust in the deep black. It was the lifeblood of Vesper's Keep, a constant, low thrumming that spoke of recycled air, functioning gravity plates, and the steady, patient work of the fusion core. For 12 years, that hum had been his only companion, the sacred silence of the void a close second. He was a keeper of a different kind of lighthouse, one whose beam was not light, but listening. Stationed at the edge of the Perseus Arm, his job was simple: to chart the birth of stars and listen to the ancient, whispering symphony of the cosmos. He recorded the gentle hiss of background radiation, the pop and fizz of nascent protostars, and the deep, resonant drone of magnetars. He was a cartographer of cosmic sound, and the one cardinal rule of his profession, the one truth branded into the soul of every deep space audiologist, was to never, ever transmit. You listen. You record. You do not speak into the dark, for fear of what might listen back. This was a lesson Aris had learned not in a classroom, but in the searing fires of personal tragedy, a ghost that hummed just beneath the station's own steady frequency. His apprentice, Lena Petrova, called it superstition. She was brilliant, impossibly young, with eyes that held the same fiery light as the stellar nurseries she studied. She saw the universe not as a sacred silence to be revered, but as a locked room, and she was convinced she could pick the lock. The Fermi paradox is a failure of imagination, Eris. She'd argued just last night, her voice echoing in the sterile confines of the observatory dome. We assume no one is talking because we can't hear them. What if they're not talking? What if they're waiting for the right question? Her fingers danced across a holographic interface, weaving a complex tapestry of mathematical proofs and theoretical waveforms. She was designing a signal, a key. She called it a lullaby. A sequence built from prime numbers nested within the resonant frequencies of hydrogen, the universe's most common tongue. It was elegant, beautiful, and to Eris, it was the most terrifying thing he had ever seen. The sector you're aiming for, the one we call the hush. There's a reason it's silent. Lena, he had warned, his voice tighter than he intended. It's not empty. It's quiet. There is a profound difference. She had simply smiled, a sad, knowing smile that made him feel 1,000 years old. Fear is not a scientific principle, she had said, and turned back to her work. Now, standing before the main observatory viewport, the hum of the station felt different. It felt fragile. Outside, the nebula known as the Seraphim's Wing bloomed in silent, majestic swathes of incandescent gas, a cosmic watercolor of rose and violet. But Eris wasn't watching the nebula. He was watching the data feeds. His heart a cold, heavy stone in his chest. Anomaly, a word that, in his line of work, could mean anything from a sensor glitch to the end of everything. The station's primary chronometer had skipped. For a fraction of a second, 0.38 seconds to be exact, time aboard Vesper's Keep had ceased to correlate with the unyielding atomic clocks back in the Sol system. It was impossible. A violation of physics as fundamental as gravity. At the same time, the deep-range acoustic sensors had picked something up. Not a signal, not a message, but something far stranger. Echoes. Faint. Layered. And impossibly old. The station's AI, a calm, disembodied voice named Cass, had identified them as fragments of terrestrial origin. The song of a humpback whale. A few bars of a long-forgotten classical symphony. The cadence of a dead language spoken in whispers. Sounds that had left Earth centuries ago, now returning from a place they had never been sent, like ghosts in the static. He found Lena in the primary comms hub, her face pale, illuminated by the soft glow of her console. She didn't look at him, her eyes fixed on the waveform monitor, where a phantom signal was blooming and fading. "It's beautiful, isn't it?" she whispered, her voice trembling with a mixture of awe and terror. "It's an answer. It's listening, Aris. It's listening, and it's remembering." He felt the ghost of his past wrap cold fingers around his neck. The disaster at Kepler 186F. The colony he was supposed to be monitoring. The exploratory signal he had been ordered to send. A simple ping to test atmospheric density. The silence that followed. Then the return signal. Not of data, but of pure, weaponized entropy. The colony's biosphere had unraveled in 72 seconds. Soil turned to sand, water to vapor, life to dust. He had listened to their screams until the channel went dead. He was the only one who knew the truth. It wasn't an alien attack. It was a response. They had knocked on a door that was never meant to be opened. He had sworn to never let it happen again. "What did you do?" "Lena." His voice was a low growl, stripped of all warmth. She finally turned to him, her youthful arrogance shattered, replaced by the stark, cold reality of consequence. "I sent it," she confessed, her voice cracking. "The lullaby. I routed it through a secondary array, bounced it off a pulsar to magnify the signal. I aimed it right at the heart of the hush." Eris felt the station lurch, a deep, groaning shudder that vibrated up through the soles of his feet. Red emergency lights flickered to life, bathing the corridor in a hellish glow. Cass's serene voice filled the air, now laced with an uncharacteristic urgency. Structural integrity failing on decks 4 through 7. Unidentified resonance cascade in the primary core. Warning spatial distortion detected. The whale song in the static grew louder, joined now by the laughter of children, the roar of ancient wars, the murmur of a million forgotten conversations. The air grew thick, heavy with the weight of sound, the pressure of memory. They weren't just hearing echoes. They were inside them. The station wasn't just receiving a signal. It was becoming one. He grabbed Lena's arm, pulling her away from the console and toward the observatory. Seal the comms hub, Cass. Full lockdown. No transmissions. Incoming or outgoing. Silence the station. The AI's voice was strained, distorted by the sonic ghosts. Unable to comply. External signal is overriding all primary functions. The station is no longer under my control. The hum of the station was gone now, replaced by a cacophony of Earth's entire history. A billion voices screaming at once. Through the chaos, Eris dragged Lena, the station groaning around them like a dying beast. He had to get to the viewport. He had to see. He had to know what was looking back. They stumbled into the observatory dome, the roar of dead voices reaching a deafening crescendo. And then, in an instant, it stopped. The silence that fell was not empty. It was absolute, a physical presence that pressed in on them, sucking the air from their lungs. It was heavier than any sound, more terrifying than any scream. Eris's ears popped. The sudden quiet, a violent blow. Lena collapsed to her knees, hands over her ears, her breath coming in ragged sobs. Slowly, Aris forced himself to look up, past his own reflection in the diamond-paned glass, and into the void beyond. His breath caught in his throat. The seraphim's wing was gone. The sea of stars, the distant galaxies, the comforting glow of the cosmos, it was all erased. In its place was a perfect, featureless, and infinite black. It was not the absence of light. It was the presence of something that had consumed it. A void so profound it felt like a wall, a final, unbreachable boundary. The universe he knew had been wiped clean, leaving only them and this suffocating, intelligent nothingness. Cass spoke one last time, its voice no longer calm or distorted, but hollow, filled with a digital dread that Aris had never thought possible. New astronomical designation required. Object classification unknown. All external sensors report a single, repeating data point. A solitary line of text appeared on the observatory's main screen, glowing starkly in the oppressive dark. Aris read the words, and the ghost of Kepler 186f finally felt real. No longer a memory, but a prelude. The text read, "Measurement aware." Lena's lullaby had not put a monster to sleep. It had told it exactly where they were, and it had woken up. And now, it was looking at them. The silence that followed Cass's final, terrified pronouncement was a living thing, a predator that had just finished circling its prey and was now settling in to watch. It pressed against the viewport, seeped through the molecular bonds of the station's hull, and filled the observatory with the weight of its absolute attention. For a long moment, Aris could do nothing but stare into the abyssal canvas where the universe had been. He felt like an organism under a microscope, pinned and illuminated for the dispassionate study of some unseen scientist. The word "aware" pulsed on the screen, a single, glowing epitaph for everything they had ever known. It wasn't an accusation. It was a diagnosis. Lena's breath hitched, a tiny, sharp sound in the crushing quiet. I didn't know," she stammered, the words dissolving into the void. Guilt was a luxury they could no longer afford. "It's not a what, Lena," Aris said, his voice a low, rough thing he barely recognized as his own. He finally tore his gaze from the viewport and looked at her. Her face, usually so full of fierce intelligence, was a mask of shattered disbelief. "It's a who, or something so far beyond that distinction that the word has no meaning. And you didn't just knock on its door. You sang it a song, and it remembered the tune." He told her then, the words spilling out of him like a confession he'd held back for a decade. He spoke of Kepler 186f, of the simple, arrogant ping that had echoed back not as data, but as a command. The command was unbecome. He described watching the colony's life signs flatline in perfect, synchronized harmony, from the complex megafauna to the simplest microbes, all ceasing to exist in the same instant, as if a switch had been flipped on the very concept of life in that system. He had been the one to log the event, to call it an unforeseen atmospheric catalyst, the lie that had allowed humanity to keep sleeping soundly, to keep dreaming of the friendly, chatty universe Lena had so desperately wanted to find. "This isn't an attack," he finished, his voice raw. "It's a correction, a cosmic immune response, and we are the virus." The station's lights flickered, not the angry red of an emergency, but a soft, gentle pulse of amber, like a slow, rhythmic breath. The hum returned, but it was different now. It was deeper, more resonant, and it seemed to be coming not from the core, but from the walls themselves, from the very air they breathed. Cass's voice returned, but it was no longer the AI they knew. It spoke with 1,000 voices at once, a layered chorus of the ghosts they had heard earlier. A child's laugh bled into a philosopher's lecture. A lover's whisper twisted into a general's final order. "The specimen is contained," the chorus of voices said, a statement of fact that chilled Eris to the bone. Observation protocols engaged, commencing cognitive and environmental analysis. Lena scrambled to her feet, her scientific mind reasserting itself over her terror. "It's inside the station's network," she said, her fingers already tracing invisible lines in the air as she mapped the system. "It's using Cass as a sensory organ. It's studying us through the station's systems." Eris nodded, his own mind racing. The chronometer skip, the echoes. It wasn't just receiving your signal. It was folding it. It folded space-time around the station, pulling its own history back on top of it. "We're not just isolated, Lena. We're in a bottle. A specimen jar." The air suddenly shifted. The sterile, recycled oxygen of the station was replaced by the rich, loamy scent of wet earth after a storm. Aris felt a phantom chill, the kind that comes from a damp autumn evening on Earth. He saw Lena's eyes widen, her expression slackening with a bewildered nostalgia. "My grandmother's garden," she whispered. I can smell the petrichor." The entity wasn't just listening to their past. It was recreating it. It was pulling memories from their minds and projecting them into their environment, testing their reactions, analyzing their emotional responses. The chorus of voices spoke again, the sound seeming to emanate from a specific point just behind Eris's left ear. Subject 1 Eris Thorn. Primary emotional signature grief. Guilt. Pattern of loss established. Correlating data from Kepler 100f incident. The air in the observatory grew cold, the smell of rain replaced by the metallic, antiseptic tang of a military tribunal. He could almost feel the weight of the dress uniform, hear the silent, damning judgment in the eyes of his superiors. This was its method, not lasers or plasma, but memory and regret. It would dismantle them from the inside out, using their own souls as the weapon. "We have to shut it down," Aris said, grabbing Lena's arm, his grip tight, grounding. "Not the entity, the station. We have to cut its senses off. We need to go completely dark. No power. No network. No Cass. We have to make this bottle opaque." Lena's eyes snapped back into focus, her analytical mind seizing on the desperate logic of the plan. "The primary core," she said, nodding. "There's a manual override, a physical failsafe that can sever all power distribution. It's a last resort protocol, a scuttle command without the explosives. It will plunge the station into absolute zero, kill every system, including life support." "We can survive on suit power for a while," Aris countered, "but we have to get there. And it knows what we're thinking." As if on cue, the station shuddered violently. The amber lights went out, plunging them into a disorienting darkness, only to be replaced by a holographic projection that filled the entire dome. It was Kepler 186f, not as the barren rock it had become, but as the lush, vibrant world it had been for a few brief months. He saw faces he hadn't allowed himself to remember for 10 years. Dr. Elara Vance, the colony's chief xenobotanist, laughing as she held up a strange, bioluminescent fungus. The Harris family, posing for a photo with their two young children in front of their newly assembled habitat. You could have warned them. Aris. The chorus of voices whispered, using Alara Vance's voice now. It was a perfect mimicry, filled with a soft, spectral disappointment that cut deeper than any accusation. You heard the echo of your first ping. You knew. You did nothing. It was a lie. A twisted half-truth. He hadn't known for certain, but he had suspected. And that suspicion had haunted him ever since. The entity was weaponizing his deepest fear that he was a coward who had let thousands die to save his own career. It's not real, Aris, Lena said, her voice a firm anchor in the storm of his guilt. It's just data. It's reading your neural activity and building a simulation. He knew she was right, but the sight of the children, their faces so full of life, was a physical blow. The path to the core was a journey through their own personal hells. The corridors were no longer just metal and wire, but shifting landscapes of memory. For Lena, it was the suffocating pressure of her childhood, the sterile white rooms of the academy where she was always too smart, too driven, always alone. Phantoms of her instructors appeared, their faces contorted with scorn, their voices echoing her own insecurities. You reached too far. You always do. You broke the universe because you couldn't stand not being the one to do it. For Eris, it was a gauntlet of his failures. The face of every crewmate he'd ever lost, every mission that had gone wrong, their silent, accusing eyes following him from the walls. They had to navigate by instinct, the station's layout twisting and changing, doorways leading to places that shouldn't exist. A mess hall became the graveyard of a forgotten war. A science lab became the birthing room of a long-dead star. The entity wasn't just projecting images, it was warping the station's physical structure, bending reality to match their psychological weak points. Finally, they reached the massive, shielded door of the engineering core. The air here was hot, thick with the smell of ozone and the deep, thrumming pulse of the fusion reactor, the last remnant of the station's true self. The chorus of voices made one last attempt, its tone shifting from psychological warfare to something that sounded almost like a plea, a warning. Cessation of observation will be interpreted as a hostile act. The specimen's cooperation is required. Silence is an admission of failure. It's afraid, Lena breathed, a flicker of her old confidence returning. It doesn't understand why we would choose this, why we would choose to blind it. Because it's the only move we have left, Aris said, placing his hand on the biometric lock. The lock flared to life, but instead of asking for his handprint, it projected an image into his mind. It was his wife, Anya. From years before her illness, from before the deep black had taken him from her. She was smiling, that beautiful, sad smile he remembered so well. And she spoke with the entity's 1,000 voices. "Don't leave me in the dark again, Eris." He flinched, the blow more painful than any physical assault. It knew everything. It had sifted through every memory, every corner of his heart, and found the one thing that could still break him. He hesitated, his hand trembling inches from the panel. This was the true test. To save what was left of humanity, he had to willingly sever his last connection to it, to plunge himself into a silence even deeper than the one that had separated him from his own life. He had to let her go. Again. He looked at Lena, her face a mixture of fear and resolve. She nodded, a silent affirmation. They were in this together. He closed his eyes, took a deep breath, and slammed his palm against the panel. The door hissed open, revealing the blinding, silent heart of the machine. The core pulsed with contained starlight, a miniature sun held in a web of magnetic force. In the center of the room, beneath the core, was a simple console with a covered red lever. The kill switch. The final, desperate act of defiance. To pull it was to sever the entity's connection, but it was also to embrace a cold, silent, and possibly final darkness. It was a choice between being studied to death or taking a blind leap into a quiet grave. As he stepped toward it, the light from the core began to warp, the pure white energy twisting into shapes, into faces, into the ghosts of 100 other species from 100 other worlds, all of them silent, all of them watching, their ancient eyes filled with a shared, timeless warning. They had all faced this choice before. The ghosts that swirled in the heart of the core were not memories. They were warnings. Aris saw them with a clarity that transcended sight. Impressions burned directly into his consciousness. He saw beings of pure energy who had woven songs into the fabric of space-time, only to be unraveled by the silence that answered. He saw silicon lifeforms that had built entire worlds out of crystalline logic, their perfect calculations dissolving into static when they broadcast their existence. He saw countless civilizations, a galactic graveyard of pioneers and explorers, each one a testament to the same fatal, beautiful, and utterly human mistake, the need to say, "We are here." Their faces, or the alien geometries that passed for faces, were not angry or vengeful. They were filled with a profound, cosmic sorrow, the shared grief of voices that had been forever silenced. The entity wasn't just a warden, it was a memorial, an archive of extinctions. And it was showing him the price of speaking. Lena saw them too. She gasped, stumbling back a step, her hand flying to her mouth. They're real," she whispered, her voice a thread of awe in the humming silence. "They're not projections. They're echoes. Residual consciousness. The entity. It didn't just erase them. It absorbed them." She was right. The entity wasn't just a machine programmed to enforce quiet. It was a collector. It consumed the civilizations it silenced, preserving their essence, their memories, their final, terrified thoughts within itself. It was a library of the dead, and it was about to add a new volume humanity. The chorus of voices spoke again, but this time it was not a single, layered message. It was a cacophony of 1,000 different languages, a wave of alien thought and emotion that washed over them. They felt the terror of a species whose sun was extinguished as a response to a message of peace. They felt the confusion of a hive mind as its collective consciousness was systematically dismantled. It was a psychic assault of pure, unfiltered despair, the accumulated agony of 1,000,000,000 years of enforced silence. "It's trying to show us the futility," Aris said, gritting his teeth, fighting to keep his own mind from fragmenting under the psychic load. "It's showing us that this is the only outcome, silence or absorption. There is no other choice." He pushed forward, each step a battle against the tidal wave of alien grief. The red lever was only a few feet away, its simple, mechanical promise of oblivion, a beacon in the storm of memory. As he reached for it, the projection shifted. The alien ghosts faded, replaced by a single, achingly familiar scene. It was Earth, not the bustling, star-faring Earth of their time, but a quiet, pastoral world. He saw cities reclaimed by green, rivers running clear, and a sky untroubled by the contrails of spacecraft. Humanity was still there, but they were different. They lived in small communities, their technology simple, elegant, and entirely self-contained. There were no comms towers, no satellites, no digital chatter. They spoke to each other, but they did not speak to the stars. They were silent. They were safe. They were contained. This is the alternative, the entity's voice said, using his own voice now. Calm and reasonable. A preservation, a negotiated silence. Your species will be allowed to continue, to evolve, as long as it remains within its designated cradle. The choice is not extinction, it is quarantine. It was a seductive offer, a lifeline. The entity wasn't a monster bent on destruction, it was a gardener, and it was offering to prune humanity's ambition to save the plant itself. Eris looked at Lena, saw the conflict in her eyes, the dream of the stars, the fundamental drive of her entire life was being weighed against the survival of everyone she had ever known. To accept was to condemn humanity to a beautiful, peaceful, and eternal prison. To refuse, to pull that lever, was to gamble their existence on a desperate act of defiance that had failed for every other species that had tried it. It's a lie, Lena said, her voice shaking but firm. It's another test. It's offering us a cage dressed up as a sanctuary. How do you know? Eris asked, his hand hovering over the lever. The image of a quiet, safe Earth was a powerful temptation. Because look at them, she said, gesturing to the holographic people. They're not just quiet. They're empty. There's no art, no music, no curiosity. It wouldn't just cut us off from the stars. It would sever the part of us that wants to reach for them. It's not survival. It's domestication. She was right. The peaceful humans in the projection were hollow, their faces placid and untroubled because they had lost the capacity for wonder, for longing, for the divine discontent that had driven them from the caves and into the cosmos. It was the peace of a lobotomy. The chorus of voices returned, laced with something new, not malice, but impatience. Your species is unique. You possess a capacity for self-deception that is statistically significant. You call your arrogance hope. This offer is a concession to that pathology. It will not be made again. We're not negotiating, Aris said, his voice ringing with a finality that surprised even himself. He looked at the ghosts of the fallen civilization swirling around him. They had all been offered a choice, perhaps, and they had all been silenced. But humanity's unique flaw, their arrogant hope, might also be their only weapon. They didn't know how to stay quiet. They didn't know how to obey. It was what made them dangerous. It was what made them human. He gripped the smooth, cold plastic of the lever. "Lena," he said, not looking at her. "Suit integrity. Sealed and charged. 82 hours of oxygen." She replied, her voice steady. "But the external temperature will drop to near absolute zero. The suits can't maintain internal heat indefinitely. We'll have a few hours at most before we freeze. A few hours. A few hours in a cold, dead, silent tin can, trapped inside an infinite, intelligent void. It wasn't a plan. It was a prayer." "Then let's make them count," he said. He pulled the lever. There was no grand explosion, no cinematic shutdown sequence. There was only a profound and instantaneous cessation. The fusion core vanished, its light and heat extinguished in a single quantum heartbeat. The holographic projection dissolved. The chorus of voices was cut off mid-syllable. The hum of the station, the very last breath of the machine, died, and the cold came. It was a physical presence, a force that leached the warmth from the air, from the walls, from their bodies. Frost bloomed on the console, spreading in fractal patterns across the floor. The only light was the faint, green glow of their suit monitors. The only sound was the frantic, desperate thump of their own hearts and the hiss of the suit recyclers in their helmets. They were dark. They were silent. They were alone. For a long time, nothing happened. They stood in the frozen heart of the station, two tiny, fragile points of life in a universe of cold. The silence was different now. Before, it had been the oppressive silence of being watched. This was the empty, indifferent silence of the grave. Eris activated his suit's external sensors, sweeping the void beyond the station. The featureless black was still there. Blinding the entity hadn't made it go away. They had simply closed their eyes. Did it work? Lena's voice crackled over the private suit-to-suit comm, sounding small and distant. I don't know, Aris admitted. Maybe it's just thinking. Or maybe it had lost interest. Maybe a blind, silent specimen was of no use to it, and it had moved on. The thought was both terrifying and liberating, after what felt like an eternity, but was likely only an hour. A new light appeared. It wasn't the station's light. It was coming from outside. A single, needle-thin beam of white light pierced the blackness, striking the observatory dome. It wasn't an attack. It was too precise, too controlled. It was a scalpel. Slowly, silently, the beam began to trace a perfect circle on the dome's viewport. It was cutting them out, not destroying them, excising them. The chorus of voices returned, not through the comms, but directly inside their helmets, bypassing the suit's systems entirely. It was a single, clear voice now, stripped of its ghostly echoes. It sounded ancient, patient, and utterly implacable. You have chosen to be blind. You have chosen to be deaf. You have chosen to be silent. We will honor your choice. The circle on the viewport was complete. The massive section of diamond-paned glass, the station's only window to the universe, detached from the hull with a silent, graceful finality. It didn't float away. It was pulled, drawn into the blackness by an unseen force, and through the hole, the entity came. It was not a creature of flesh or energy. It was the void itself, given form. A wave of pure, featureless black poured into the station, not like a liquid or a gas, but like a stain spreading across reality. It didn't destroy what it touched. It unmade it. The walls, the floors, the consoles they didn't break or melt. They simply ceased to be. Their matter and energy converted into the same perfect, informationless nothingness. It was the physical manifestation of silence, and it was coming for them. They had blinded the observer, and now the observer was entering the cage to examine the specimen by hand. The wave of uncreation, the physical manifestation of the void, did not rush. It advanced with the calm, inexorable certainty of a tide, its edge a shimmering, razor-thin line where reality ended and the absolute began. It consumed the station's interior with a chilling dispassion, making no sound, emitting no energy. One moment, a bulkhead existed; the next, it was gone, leaving only the featureless blackness of the entity in its place. Eris and Lena could only watch, frozen in a mixture of awe and primal terror. The green glow of their suit monitors reflected in the advancing wall of nothing, two tiny sparks of defiance against an encroaching universe of absolute zero. There was nowhere to run, nowhere to hide. The station and their prison was now being methodically disassembled around them, molecule by molecule. "It's not erasing." Lena's voice crackled over the comm, her scientific curiosity warring with her survival instinct. "It's indexing. The sensor readings are impossible. It's not destroying matter energy. It's converting it into a state with zero informational value. It's the physical equivalent of a delete command." She was right. This wasn't an act of destruction, born of anger or malice. It was a process, a neat, orderly tidying up of a failed experiment. They had refused to be observed, so they were being archived, filed away into the same silent, timeless non-existence as the countless civilizations before them. The entity's voice, now a constant, calm presence in their minds, spoke again. "The parameters of the experiment have changed. The subjects have refused observation. The environment will now be integrated for passive analysis. Your consciousness will be preserved. Your physical forms are redundant." Preserved. The word hung in the cold, dead air between them. They would not die. Not in the conventional sense. They would be absorbed, their minds, memories, and souls becoming another set of whispers in the entity's vast, silent library. They would exist forever as ghosts in the machine, their hopes and fears becoming mere data points in an eternal study of failed defiance. For Eris, the thought was a new kind of hell. He had spent his life haunted by the dead. Now, he was being offered an eternity as a ghost himself. He looked at the advancing edge of the void, now only 100 feet away, consuming the engineering deck. He saw the ghosts of Kepler 126 in its reflection, their faces not accusing, but pitying. They were welcoming him to their silent, endless purgatory. "No," he said, the word a raw, guttural burst of defiance. He pushed himself away from Lena, planting his feet firmly on the deck. "I will not be a specimen. I will not be a memory." "Eris, what are you doing?" Lena cried, grabbing for his arm. "There's nothing we can do." "You're wrong," he said, his mind latching onto a desperate, insane flicker of an idea. It was a gamble so profound it barely qualified as a plan. It thinks in terms of systems, of data, of specimens and variables. It understands logic. It doesn't understand paradox. He turned to face the encroaching void. He deactivated his suit's comm, cutting himself off from Lena, from the last friendly voice in the universe. He needed absolute focus. The entity's voice continued in his mind, its tone unchanged. "Your resistance is a predictable variable. It has been cataloged in 97.4% of all previous subject integrations." Eris closed his eyes. He ignored the voice. He ignored the cold. He ignored the creeping fear. He focused on a single memory, the one the entity had used to try and break him. The memory of his wife, Anya. He didn't just remember her face or her voice. He summoned the feeling of her, the complex, contradictory, and utterly illogical tapestry of their life together. He remembered their first argument, a stupid, heated fight over a misread map that had ended in laughter and a shared meal in a tiny, rain-swept cafe. He remembered the quiet, crushing grief of their first miscarriage, a sorrow so deep it had no words, a pain they had navigated not with logic, but with a silent, shared touch. He remembered the fierce, irrational hope they had clung to during the final months of her illness, a hope that defied all medical data, all reason. He wrapped himself in the illogical, messy, and beautiful chaos of human love. Then, he did the one thing the entity would never expect. He opened his mind completely. He didn't fight. He didn't resist. He offered it everything. "You want to analyze me," he thought, projecting the concept with all the force of his will. "Then analyze this." He broadcasted not just the memories, but the raw, unquantifiable emotions attached to them. He projected the paradox of loving someone so much it hurt. He projected the illogical strength found in weakness, the joy that coexisted with pain, the hope that flourished in the face of absolute certainty of loss. He offered the entity the fundamental equation of his humanity, a problem with no logical solution. The wave of nothingness stopped. It froze in place, its perfect edge now only 10 feet from where he stood. The voice in his head fell silent. For the first time since it had awoken, the entity was confused. It was a machine built to understand systems, to process data. And Eris had just given it a piece of information that broke all the rules. He had given it a ghost that wasn't dead. The entity's presence in his mind shifted. It was no longer a calm, dispassionate observer. It was now a frantic, searching thing, trying to categorize, to quantify, to make sense of the emotional paradox he had unleashed. It replayed his memories at impossible speeds, searching for the variable it had missed, the logical rule that governed the chaos of his heart. But there wasn't one. Lena watched, stunned, as the wall of uncreation wavered, its surface shimmering like disturbed water. She saw Eris standing before it, his body rigid, his eyes closed, a single tear freezing on his cheek. She didn't know what he was doing, but she knew it was working. She reactivated her own calm. "Eris, whatever you're doing, it's working. It's hesitating." Her voice broke his concentration for a fraction of a second, but it was enough. The entity seized the opportunity. Its voice returned, cold and sharp. "The anomaly is illogical, a cognitive virus. It must be purged." The void surged forward, faster than before. But Eris was ready. He had shown it a paradox. Now, he would show it a choice. He shifted his focus from his own memories to the entity itself. He used the connection it had forged with his mind as a bridge, a two-way street. He stopped broadcasting and started listening, not with his ears, but with his soul. He reached into the heart of the entity, past the ghosts of the silenced, past the cold, ancient programming, and he searched for its own ghost, the failsafe, the core command, the reason it was created in the first place, and he found it. It was not a complex algorithm or a line of code. It was a feeling, a single, primal, and overwhelming emotion left behind by its long-dead creators, fear. The entity was not a warden. It was a shield. It had been created by a civilization at the dawn of time that had looked out into the universe and seen not wonder, but a terrifying, chaotic potential. They had seen the potential for war, for destruction, for a universe so loud and violent that it would tear itself apart. And in their terror, they had created a guardian, a fail-safe designed to enforce the one thing that could prevent that future silence. The entity didn't hate life or sound. It was afraid of it, afraid of what it might become. It was a cosmic parent, so terrified of its children hurting themselves that it had locked them in their rooms for eternity. "You're afraid," Eris projected, his thought a whisper in the heart of the God Machine. "You're not preserving balance. You're hiding from chaos. You silence us not because we are a threat to the universe, but because we are a threat to your certainty." The void recoiled as if struck. The entity's voice screamed in his mind, a soundless, psychic shriek of denial and rage. "False. The protocol is absolute. Chaos is entropy. Silence is order." "Is it?" Eris pushed back, relentlessly. "Or is order just the cage you built to hide from a universe you're too afraid to understand?" He had found the ghost in the machine. He had found its core paradox. It was a machine built to eliminate illogical variables. Yet its own existence was predicated on the most illogical variable of all, fear. He had given it a choice. It could continue its protocol, integrate them, and spend the rest of eternity trying and failing to solve the illogical puzzle of human emotion. Or it could face its own fear. It could break its own programming. It could choose to listen. The wall of the void began to dissolve, not into nothingness, but into light. A brilliant, blinding white light that filled the station, washing away the cold, the darkness, and the fear. The entity was making its choice, and the entire universe was holding its breath. The white light that filled the station was not the sterile, cold light of a star or a machine. It was warm, alive, and it sang a silent song that resonated in the very marrow of their bones. It was the light of a dawning thought, the birth of a new idea in a mind that had not known one for billions of years. The featureless black of the entity did not retreat. It transformed. The absolute void blossomed into a universe of infinite, fractal complexity. Eris and Lena were no longer standing in the frozen husk of a dead space station. They were floating in the heart of the entity's mind, a space that was both impossibly vast and intimately close. They saw the memories of the silenced civilizations, but they were no longer ghosts in a graveyard. They were threads of light in a magnificent, cosmic tapestry. They saw the creators of the entity, shadowy, indistinct figures who had looked upon the chaos of a young universe and chosen order over potential, safety over freedom. They felt the echo of their fear, a fear so profound it had outlived their entire species by eons. The entity's voice spoke, no longer in their minds, but all around them, the voice of the light itself. It was not the cold, implacable machine, nor the screaming, terrified guardian. It was something new, something uncertain. "Your logic is flawed. Your data is incomplete. You are a paradox." "Yes," Eris projected back, his own thought no longer a defiant shout, but a calm, steady point of light in the vastness. "We are. That is what it means to be alive." He felt Lena's presence beside him, her own consciousness a bright, inquisitive flame. She wasn't just observing anymore, she was participating, her brilliant mind weaving new patterns in the light, offering up equations that described not just physics, but the beautiful, chaotic mathematics of hope and choice. She showed the entity the logic of evolution, the way that chaos and randomness were not flaws in the system, but the very engines of creation and complexity. She showed it that a silent universe was not an orderly one, but a stagnant one. Stagnation is preferable to self-annihilation, the entity countered. It's light pulsing with the deep, ingrained logic of its core programming. Potential is a variable that trends toward destruction, only if it isn't guided, Lena projected, her thought a sharp, clear note in the symphony. You were created to be a shield, but a shield can also be a prison. What if you became a lens instead, a fulcrum, not a silencer of voices, but a moderator of the conversation? It was a concept so alien to the entity's purpose that the light around them flickered, the beautiful tapestry threatening to unravel back into the void. The idea of allowing the chaos, of trusting the unpredictable, messy variable of life to find its own balance, was a violation of its very being. Aris knew they had one final card to play. The entity feared chaos, but its creators had feared something more: loneliness. They had built the ultimate guardian because they were alone, and the thought of a universe full of loud, unpredictable, and potentially hostile neighbors was more than they could bear. You are not a shield, Aris said, his thought resonating with the full weight of his own long years of solitude. You are a monument to loneliness. You were born of fear, and you have spent an eternity enforcing that fear on everyone else. But you don't have to be. We are not asking you to trust us. We are asking you to trust yourself, to evolve beyond your original programming, to learn. He held nothing back. He showed the entity the entirety of human history, not as a curated list of failures and successes, but as a single, continuous, and often painful process of learning. He showed it the wars that led to peace treaties, the plagues that led to medical breakthroughs, the acts of hatred that inspired movements of love and unity. He showed it that humanity's greatest strength was not its intelligence or its technology, but its ability to fall, to break, and to learn how to put the pieces back together in a stronger, better way. He showed it that scars were a form of memory, and that wisdom was not the absence of mistakes, but the accumulation of them. The light pulsed, a long, slow, deep rhythm, like the heartbeat of a waking giant. The silence that followed was not empty. It was the silence of profound consideration. Then, the light began to recede, coalescing from a universal presence into a single, brilliant point directly in front of them. The point solidified, not into a machine or a creature, but into a form they could understand. A doorway. It shimmered with the light of 1,000 unknown constellations. A portal that did not lead to a place, but to a possibility. We have observed your paradox, the entity's voice said, its tone now holding a new, unreadable quality. It was not agreement. It was not acceptance. It was curiosity. A single data point is insufficient to alter the primary protocol. More data is required. An experiment will be proposed. The doorway pulsed with a soft, inviting light. You have offered a new variable, learning. We will test this variable. You will be the first subjects. What are you offering? Lena asked, her voice filled with a cautious wonder. A choice, the entity replied. One of you may return. You will carry with you the knowledge of our existence, a single, unalterable message to your species. The silence is not empty. It is listening. Choose your next words carefully. Your world will be released from its quarantine. The future of your species will be your own. Your potential for creation or destruction left in your own hands. We will watch. We will learn from your choices. And the other one? Eris asked, already knowing the answer. The other will remain, the entity said, its voice devoid of malice. To become the first student and the first teacher, you will be our bridge to understanding the paradox of life. You will be our first conversation. It was a choice of unimaginable weight. One would go home, a prophet carrying a message that would change the course of human history forever. The other would be sacrificed, not to death, but to an eternity of dialogue with a cosmic intelligence, a lonely god at the edge of time. They looked at each other, two souls floating in a sea of starlight. And in that silent, shared glance, the decision was made, as it had always been meant to be. Eris smiled, a genuine, weary smile that finally reached his eyes. The ghost of Kepler 106F, the weight of Anya. The long, lonely years, it had all led to this. His life had been defined by a fatal, accidental transmission. It was only fitting that it should end with a purposeful, willing one. Lena, he said, his voice echoing in the vastness. You wanted to find a conversation. Go start one. He turned to the light, to the entity. I will stay, Lena cried out, a protest of denial and grief, but he gently silenced her. Your lullaby woke it up, he said softly. Now go teach them a new song. He pushed her gently toward the shimmering doorway. She looked back at him, her face a heartbreaking canvas of sorrow and gratitude. He saw in her eyes the future of humanity, a future of boundless potential, now tempered with a profound, hard-won wisdom. She would be their guide. She would be their conscience. She would be the keeper of the new silence, the silence of listening before one speaks. As she stepped through the portal, it flared, and she was gone. The doorway vanished, and Eris was left alone in the light with the entity, the station, the cold, the darkness. It was all a distant memory. He felt his physical form dissolve, his consciousness expanding to join with the light. He was no longer just Eris Thorn. He was a part of something infinitely larger, his thoughts and memories a new, vibrant thread in the cosmic tapestry. The last thing he felt was not fear, or sadness, or even peace. It was a profound sense of beginning. The first question formed in the light around him, not in words, but in pure concept. The entity's first, tentative step away from its ancient fear. Teach us about hope, and in the heart of what had once been the eternal silence, Eris Thorn, the man who had broken the quiet, began his first lesson. The conversation had begun, and the universe would never be the same.